I wanted to show you how to put together some really interactive user interfaces in augmented reality. User interfaces and augmented reality can be a really difficult topic because it's just like, how are you even supposed to do it? In particular for something that's cross-compatible between Quest and mobile. So I wanted to work on both of those platforms. And there's actually this really nice library called UIKit that allows us to do that all. And it's really nice because it's set up in a way that it just represents a DOM, and then we can just do actions on the DOM, and it just makes everything a lot simpler. It also has vectorized graphics, which are really nice because that means that you have kind of the scale independence. I love how non-judgmental dogs are of augmented reality. Like, you have a giant thing on your head. You can still play fetch. So for an example, I wanted something that's like a little bit more complicated. And so we're going to go with a fantasy game inventory UI and then just kind of play around with that. Okay, so let's split this into two pieces. Let's talk about the design philosophy, and then let's talk about how we can build that philosophy using code and like what's available today. So there's going to be like two things that I want to keep in mind while building this UI. So user control and then also readability. By user control, I mean if you're not looking, if you look away from the UI, it shouldn't follow you. Like in terms of like having things stuck to the viewport, I think is actually a bad design for AR. It's much more frustrating when you have like a mini map that's like clipped to your face. Like if you have a mini map, I think it should be like somewhere where you have to look towards. And then in terms of readability, it's really easy to end up with like upside down or backwards words in AR. When you get to all these like weird transforms and stuff, you can end up with things being upside down and in weird places and stuff. But I think that everything should always still be readable. Like you should, if there is a word, it should be a word that you can read, and it shouldn't be like upside down. And so those are the two things that I'm going to be kind of focusing on. So for this UI, like the thing that I'm going to like try implementing is something that pivots around the playable character, so that if you're looking at the playable character, you can read everything, but if you look away from the playable character, the information doesn't like stay with you. It's like it only exists with that character. And that way it kind of gets both of those ideas under wraps. Yeah. But there's so many ways that you can do it. I'm not sure if it's right. I just don't really like things sticking to my face. If you're doing this with the React 3 Fiber, you can basically write it up as HTML and then turn it into a 3D UI. But we're going to be using it with 3JS, which means instead we're just going to kind of create an import map and just import a lot of these things manually, and that's going to be our solution. Yeah. So you basically build out elements and then you attach those elements together, kind of like a tree. You can make this a lot simpler. I was just doing a lot of experimenting, so it's still kind of messy for me. Could actually consolidate this pretty well. So there's some extra difficulties with vanilla when we come to inputs. So those aren't actually supported, so we kind of have to build our own. But the ray casting is built out so nicely that it's actually pretty straightforward. We basically just ray cast to the object, and then we can kind of do an click in the background to get that object. One of the problems this does bring up, though, is that we have this problem of having an unfocused event partway through. I still haven't really quite figured out how to deal with this. So, like for instance, if you click on an input and then you click on a different input, there's going to be an unfocused event in between. So it's going to remove your keyboard and then add your keyboard back. Whereas if we could avoid that unfocusing, like we could just switch the focus, then all of a sudden we wouldn't have that, and the like input would just change. And that is a bit of a frustrating thing, but like it's hard to get rid of unless I'm missing something that I haven't thought of. One thing that I really appreciate, which like it probably seems like a simple thing now, but like when you scale things and you move things around in the UI, those things like it happens how it's supposed to happen. That doesn't always happen when you build your own UI. Sometimes you scale things and they don't scale appropriately and you end up with this complete mess. So this means that when we're doing the animations, we can basically just use any animation library. And so if you have one that you're very comfortable with, it's pretty easy to just input that in, and then it's just so nice. It's just so nice. So there's kind of two different common ways of doing signaling with this. So you can add event listeners to the elements in question so that when they're clicked and stuff, then you can kind of just like do whatever the element says. And then you can also use preact. So that's kind of the inbuilt signaling system. And that can be really helpful for like changing variables in the actual thing. So if you wanted to do any sort of like more fancy UI work, oftentimes you're going to have to use preact. And yeah, so then things like changing the sizing and stuff, like that's oftentimes how it gets reached. I think there could be a little bit more work put into deleting things. Deleting things is a little bit more challenging than I'd expect, but it still works out all right. So it's not like the hardest thing. It's just a little bit of a headache. Thanks and have a great day.